Good morning and good afternoon to those of you that are here. Theo Ford-Stiegler with Nexus for Change is here for our monthly Collaborative Change Library Author Jam. It is wonderful to have Dave and Carol here alongside with Lisa Hay from Nexus. And we think we also have Stefan and Petra maybe here from Germany representing their work. I am half tempted with this small group to see if we will end up switching gears and sort of saving the conversation that I had envisioned for maybe for next month, but I'll share what I was thinking with you in a minute and we'll go from there. I wanted to share with those of you that are here and those of you that maybe are then listening to the recording, how just cool and a joy it is to be teaching from the Collaborative Change Library and have students react to the work that all you authors have championed in many cases for so many years, sometimes decades and more. And to see students sort of arriving at some of the aha moments that I had myself maybe a decade ago or longer ago, and some of them having new aha moments where I pause and go, wait, I never thought of it that way. The one specific sort of anecdote that I want to offer that brought me to sort of the intention of what I was hoping we might chat about today is that I had a student in my leadership course yesterday reflect on, so there was a breakout and I sent them all away in groups of 4s and 5s to reflect on polarity. And what are some polarities maybe in your life? We had just introduced that concept and talked about polarity management. We had also talked about, though, what are some leadership frameworks that might benefit from us considering that it can be more beneficial to consider the both and versus the either or tensions. And so we had talked about Stephen Covey and Habits for Highly Effective People, and we had talked about servant leadership and Robert Greenleaf, and we had talked about humble leadership and Ed Schein. And so we come back from this breakout and the floor is sort of open for people to reflect on what are some polarities maybe that you've discussed or that you are now aware of that maybe you hadn't thought about. And he offered that around leadership specifically, he thought it was important for leaders to consider the polarity of showing up with really strong self-confidence, and how is that maybe a polarity to humility on the other side, and where is humble leadership maybe something that needs to coexist with sort of having moments where you are the authoritarian person and you show up with referent or reward power and you say it's my way or the highway until I can go back to being of a more inquiring mind. And so my question for you this morning, this afternoon, at this time, was going to be to sort of reflect on some of these folks that that we've lost over the last 3 years, and the people that came to mind for me, and just a curiosity if there are stories for you, anecdotes, maybe favorite insights that you've garnered with any thought leaders that come to mind for you in your field. These were 5 that came to mind for me. Stefan, hello. It is good to see you. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Excellent.
Everything fine. Sorry for being late. And
not a problem.
Of technical reasons.
Not a problem.
Nice to see you.
We can hear you well, and glad that you can hear us. So I was just sharing the joy that I've been having teaching both a leadership class and a facilitating collaboration class that leans very heavily on the Collaborative Change Library, and seeing sort of the insights that my students are having around the work that you all have been doing and are doing, and reading specifically your individual chapters and having some of the same aha moments that I had when I first started grappling with some of the chapters, and having some new ones. And one insight that was really intriguing to me that happened in my leadership class yesterday was one student offered around the idea of polarity. What are some of the both ands that we ought to be considerate of in leadership? He offered that he wanted to be more in tune and more aware of the potential polarity between humbly inquiring and showing up with humility as a leader, but also being self-assured and having moments where you need to show up with authority and be perceived as somebody that, yes, we're going to make this decision and I will follow you because I refer to you the experience and the data and the background and the insights that I may not have, and how to be aware of both and have it as a both and rather than as an either or. And so my invitation to you would be any thought leader, and it doesn't have to be somebody that has passed away necessarily, but these 5 were the ones that I was reflecting on this morning. Is there some favorite anecdote, some insight that you have with somebody that you consider an elder or a mentor that you could share with us? That's the invitation I wanted to offer.
Not many people are older than I am right now. They left. But I did have an occasion yesterday to tune in on a conversation with Peter Block. It was sponsored by
the Center for Purposeful Leadership?
Yeah, CPL. And it was quite interesting to see, speaking of humility, it was quite interesting to see Peter engaged on the Zoom screen, listening carefully as people spoke, attending one of the breakout groups. But one of the things he said that really sticks with me, he said, my new book, and he held it up, is coming out next week. And I'm terrified. There's so much I would rather change now in this book. And that said 2 things to me. It said, even though he has written authoritatively over the years, he's not completely sure that every word he laid out in that book is his best word so far. And the other is that he's a little shy, which really struck me because I have followed his work as much as I have several other people. And I always felt he was, if anything, kind of a not necessarily a rule breaker, but someone who would publicly question rules of life that, particularly the commercial rules, the economy, the political structures. He was more of my generation where we were challenging all of that. So there he was, probably in his 80s, yes, saying, I'm afraid of this book coming out. So what are your thoughts on that?
I love it. And I'm privileged to know Peter. Yeah. And when you said he's shy, it just struck me as how many of these people are really shy or introverts who have learned to be public figures.
Yeah.
And I think there are many of them. And so I think I'm next in the age hierarchy, not too far behind you, Dave. So I'll go next. And you struck such a chord. And Teo, I'm really grateful that you're doing this. This is a very special moment when Ed passed last Thursday.
Yeah.
And so my continuation of this is that I had a reacquaintance with Ed Schein within the last 2 years. And we reminisced about how we were both at the Society for Organizational Learning most at the beginning. He was there before. He was there when it was at MIT's Center for Organizational Change, and then it moved to Seoul. And when it moved to Seoul, which is the Society for Organizational Learning, Ed Schein became the founding editor.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I have on my lower bookshelf all the physical issues of Reflections, the learning journal.
Yeah.
And he was the editor of probably the first 4 years. And then it was no longer being supported by MIT. And he was no longer the founding editor. He transferred it to somebody else. So we were having this chat about the initial preface that he wrote as the founding editor. And we were in the middle of doing CCL. So I had picked it up and read it, and we read it together. And the words for both of us, the words that he wrote in the first issue were still what he was deeply committed to in life. All these years later, this was in 1998 writing.
Yeah.
And the consistency of the people on that you've chosen, Teo, I think is really interesting. That they didn't move from what their basic premise was. But I didn't know Ed Schein in those days. And I don't know him now, but I know a lot of people who worked with him very closely. And they said he was difficult and very opinionated. And I think that the majority of the people who are writing now and saying these things about being humble and recognizing what your, I assume, young student recognized in class. And
I would presume like in his early 20s, yeah.
And I think the new generation is much more aware of the polarities as opposed to the command and control of leaders that certainly Dave and I grew up with.
Mm.
Oh, Stefan and I did too.
Actually, that good point.
No, but that's interesting because and you know as well from your work with German companies, Carol, that there's certainly that element of leadership that in the Germanic leadership context is huge, and in some ways I think sometimes it's a really interesting. That's why it was so powerful to me to hear the student talk about, I think this is a polarity, right? Because many of the conversations that I remember having growing up in Germany and being somebody who was under German leaders, and that I now have with my siblings who, have a younger brother who has worked in marketing and advertising, and sort of the leadership styles, people talk about them as either ors. Well, he's clearly the kind of get shit, done authoritarian kind of leader, and here's somebody else who's like, he's more of a softie. And then people talk about the soft skills as if they were somehow an opposing thing to making difficult decisions and owning them. And so I was really fascinated that without that being a prompt or on one of my slides as a suggestion, that the students were like, I think there's a polarity here where we could sort of, there's two poles here that we might be moving about within. And I do think that, I'm looking at the slide of these people, that some of whom I've been blessed to meet in person, and some of whom I've met through their work. It seems that all 5 of these individuals acknowledge that tension, that challenge.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I had another interesting night last Wednesday. Bill Brendel hosted a open source OD deep learning session with Ed Schein and Peter Schein. And there were 9 of us, including them. So it was very close in. And Bill and his team had taken one of Ed's cases, the one that happened to be about digital. And they recorded and worked hard to record a role play with the main characters. And they would stop every once in a while and say, what do you think is happening? That kind of thing. It was kind of good, interesting teaching. But I watched Ed. And he was watching. But at the end of the segment, he looked straight into the camera, straight at Bill, who had a very close relationship apparently, and said, I don't like this. I don't like how you represented Ken. What the heck was his name? The CEO. And he went on to say why, but it wasn't like, I don't like this, but it was stern. and I looked at Bill on the others, in his box, and I'm thinking, oh man, I don't want to be Bill right now. Bill was very good. He took it in. He demonstrated what we teach. He practiced what we teach. He held himself steady. He explained the theory behind that approach, trying to shake us up a little bit. And Ed said, well, I never heard of that theory, and good to know about. And then after kind of giving him a tap, he went on and talked quite a while about what really happened at Digital, how he had spent nearly 30 years knowing all of the main characters as their consultant. And it was amazing insights. Could not have gotten it anywhere. It was just 10 minutes of man, oh man, oh man. This is a person who lived through the growth and rather sudden death of one of our great companies. And he spoke about it with such softness. See, there's the other side, your polarity. And how much he thought of the CEO, but he was also very clear. He said the what do you call them? The barons who formed these fiefdoms within the company basically rendered Ken Gray obsolete and unnecessary. And he said that about his friend Ken, and he saw it coming and he confronted them, but it didn't matter. And so they never got to the point where any one priority was the next thing they put out in the market. And then the other companies zoom past them with their PCs. So that was amazing. This hear Ed talk that way about this particular case. And then we only had a few minutes left, and everyone went around with last thoughts. And that was my opportunity to say that because they started talking about contracting and how do you contract, what are the deliverables when you're doing organization development? Can you promise something on a contract that'll turn out better for the organization? And of course, Peter and he are in business, so they kind of had to talk a little bit about that contracting. And then I had a chance to say that when I was invited to the first time to consult in a major company, I called Peter and I said, I need your advice. I don't want to fail at this. And he said, well, my advice is pretty simple. Love the people, hate the system. Love the organization. If you come in with love, if it's real to you and you really love the organization you're helping, you'll do wonderfully. But if you can't love it, don't do it. And then it's Ed's turn. What's your last thought, Ed? And he said, I'll simply repeat what Peter told David. Love. And that was the last word he spoke. And then he clicked off his little box. So that's the last word I heard Ed Schein teach. It was quite inspiring.
That's awesome, because now you're aligning with me, who's about to try to contract for our capstone project in my master's class on Saturday.
Love.
And it's going to be easy to love the animal rescue that we're going to work with. So
Definitely.
those are well-timed words
Yeah.
to take into Saturday for our team. And Teo had chimed in earlier. He knows the, I think, executive director over there. So
Hmm.
and I think that's what resonated with me, is that I wouldn't know anyone on that slide, not personally. I didn't get the opportunity, but being here and having you all attend and share those stories, you keep them alive, and you pass on your wisdom. And I would like to say I'm as young as Teo's student. I'll just pretend over here, but Dr. Katie, in one of our earliest classes, I think it was 6015, had said that, who's the next generation, who's the next who is going to step to the plate for OD. And we very much rely on those that come to this meeting, that author the things that we're learning and get the opportunity to use, learn from, and then have our own perspective. And hopefully we'll be doing the same thing you're doing here, is bringing those lessons to the next generation. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it moons aligned, that advice to love the organization. We're about to, and at least in this case, it's easy, right?
Well,
I
it
can't
is and it
imagine.
isn't. I mean, you're going to find some moments like,
Sure.
oh,
My example
you're going to
is what I
find.
mean. I'm lucky that it's an animal rescue, because I'm not always going to work with.
Yeah, but there's some
organization.
people involved too. But the thing is that if you know that you're in there for what love gives, which is hope and faith in others, then even the moments where people are clashing, or you see some behavior that doesn't seem to resemble their mission, you'll react to it differently, I think, than if you're in there sort of a clinical mechanical rule with a one size fits all perspective. It would not be pleasant. And Carol mentioned something about Ed that I've noticed too, that with several people that we're doing a 50-year anniversary sort of legacy view of the Organization Behavior Teaching Society. And so I've been in conversation with several of the founders of that organization, who are now in their 70s and 80s. And the same thing. Early on, if they wanted a journal, someone in their 20s or so had to raise his or her hand and say, all right, I'll edit the first one. I'll get it off the ground. So David Bradford and Peter Vail and John Miller, Alan Cohen, all those guys just said, hey, let's have a journal. Well, let's do it. Let's have a conference every year. It was all, along with everything else they were trying to accomplish in their lives, young families, many of them probably hadn't been tenured yet. They believed in themselves and what they wanted the world to know about organization behavior teaching. And so they got it going. So that was similar to Carol's story with Ed. Believed in organizational learning, do something about it.
Are you complete, Dave?
Yeah.
You trigger to other things about that, words of wisdom. And I like what you said, Teo. That's a lot of wisdom for a young 20-year-old. I'm finding the young people extremely wise. There seems to be a gap between us and the ones coming up. It's very interesting. But two things that I have fond memories of in that first conversation with Ed, was he was able to go into any consulting project with no need to make money, because his identity was as a professor. And that continued.
That helped.
I think it's a pre-existing condition that makes for success for many people who are doing consulting with the basic place that they are somewhere else. And what he went on to say was that startup time in Seoul was, I think he said the happiest, but I'll give the possibility that he said one of the happiest periods of his life. And the reason for that was that it was really charting new territory, bringing together things that had been siloed before. And the impetus, I can send you the introduction to the reflections, and you can post it, Teo, if you
That'd
like.
be great. I was going to ask you, even if you can just take a picture with your phone or.
I think I have an electronic copy, but I'll send it to you. It would be worthwhile to have in our archives.
Please.
That organization was begun with the idea that you had to integrate organizations as the case field. They provided the content, like your animal shelter, Lisa.
Mhm.
You then needed researchers who could apply theory and then bring it forward, so there was continuous learning. And because the field was just beginning, there weren't a lot of people or organizations who could help with what we would now call methods.
Mhm.
So they called them capacity builders.
Yep, I
The
remember that.
capacity, and the capacity builders were really consultants. And we didn't use the language at the time, but that's what my calling to it was. This was really about how do you collaborate. So he is so committed to that. And well, I don't have to say anymore. Those were the two things, the integration, and that if you can go in without feeling you have to get the next gig, which is how most consultants operate, you can go in with love.
Yep.
There's maybe another interesting polarity there between having to make a living and loving and having to make a living. And another thing that jumps out at me from you all sharing, and I want to invite Stefan into the conversation with this specifically, is the wisdom of the youth. We're talking about some folks that have passed on or that are up in age that have been impactful. I was so fascinated when I got Petra and Stefan's book, the exact title of which escapes me right now, but the work that they've done with schools. And that sometimes the simplicity of looking at things is completely lost on us once we get into high school and undergraduate and graduate studies, and we look at all these intricacies and we want to, and sometimes it takes a young person to say, isn't there a polarity between humility and self-assurance, like how, or having a 12 I think an 8-year-old said this to me. Oh, I get it. So you're trying to get me to try new things because you're saying if I just do the stuff I'm already good at, I'm not going to learn anything new.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. So, Stefan, I want to invite you to see. I'm curious if you have any mentors that you'd be willing to share about. But I know that in the work that you and Petra have done recently, that some of those, the wisdom of the youth is sometimes something that I think that I'll speak for myself, that I have found I sometimes am dismissive of, and I'm really missing out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you for your invitation and your warm words to our publication, Change School Guidebook. This was the title. And of course, young people are very important for me to give inspiration and to give some kind of feeling what are important values to change society, to change school, and to change the way of living. But I would like to invite you to listen to a citation of an old man, which was very inspiring for me, and not a young man, as you intend to. It's Robert Jung, and he was born 110 years ago and died in 1994. And I would like to place a site in the chat, so it would be much more easier to explain and instead of reading. So
Sure.
please look in the chat, everyone, because these words are very important for my values, which lead me to networking and to solidarity between the people. And these are values I think are very important for me. So, to everyone. Especially important for Robert Jung was to see, it seems to be the overcoming of homelessness of social inventors by giving them opportunities to meet resembling companions and talented partners who will face each other at public announced places with their intentions of exchanging views and swapping new ideas. Unheard and undreamt ideas will prosper by working together in such a receptive, non-instructed atmosphere of solidarity.
Wow.
And these are some words he wrote 35 years ago in 1988. And well, these words moved me. So most important, it's a long sentence, of course. It's a style of writing in the 80s, yeah. Today you write in very short sentences. What's important for me here, this is you need a home, a kind of a place where you can meet each other. The people who invent more than the simple things of life, yeah, to look to future perspectives, and should be kind of public places where the social inventors, the people who feel I can invent something for society, can meet. And these public places, it's a bit like the collaborative change library could be, but in the words of Robert Jung, it was a real place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a virtual place, of course. And for me, very important is always to come together and to swap new ideas from one another and see what emerges, what comes new ideas out of just telling what are my maybe fantastic or maybe some unreal thoughts about solving problems in society and education in many branches, yeah, and to give them freely, not for money, but to give these ideas just for in an atmosphere of solidarity, yeah, to give them a way to share knowledge. So
wow.
What do you think about this? It's not written by me, of course, but it's very inspiring for me
Yeah.
all the years.
I love it.
Beautiful.
Unheard and undreamt ideas. Man, I'm gonna tattoo that on my arm. That's what we need. And Young knew that.
The receptive, non-instructed atmosphere of solidarity.
Wow.
That's what we need so that unheard and undreamt ideas can prosper.
Mhm.
And it needs us to be working together. I mean, just that second, I'm sort of focused in. Maybe Mr. Jung would not appreciate me making that a separate paragraph, but that's just what I was drawn to.
Oh, it
And-
stands out.
And Stefan, I have to tell you, the fact that he wrote this in 1988 for this little East German boy over here absolutely kicks my pants. My uncle Andreas a couple of years ago received the highest German civilian award from the German president for his work in 88 and 89 and 1990 around the reunification of the two Germanys. He was never somebody who wanted any awards for any of his work, but he was doing, and many others with him, exactly this kind of thing. And what strikes me, being a minister's son in East Germany, this place where people went were the churches, not because they were all Christians and all, it was like a faith-based, but those were the safe spaces that you thought you had a little bit better protection from the Stasi than if you were meeting in somebody's home, where likely the phone was bugged and people would show up that would take notes and then report back. So the time period of him saying this, not that it's not impactful now, but that really is sort of stunning to me in a wonderful way. I wish that we had more connectivity, and maybe that's something I want to co-own down the road a little bit. I wish that we had more connectivity between the German thinking around organizational leadership and organizational development and organizational behavior and the English and American schools of thought. There is still, I think, a lot of potential for us to translate one another and read of one another that is missing. Carol, did you put that just to me? No, Carol said that to everyone.
No,
So
I said it to everybody.
yeah, there might
I
be
got that book too, and I
right.
know enough German to know that I can't understand it.
There might be an opportunity, Stefan, for us to collaborate to see if maybe there ought to be at least an executive summary or overview of that guidebook in English that we can maybe publish as part of the Collaborative Change Library, and then refer to the full German translation or version and publication. But yeah, I don't know that, or I'm convinced, I will say, that there's a lot of thinking in Latin America too, for example, that some people here in North America are aware of, and some people in Europe are aware of, but we seem to still have a lot of sort of informed by, I think our academia sort of centers of thought, where it would be so wonderful if we could understand each other better and listen to one another and understand what maybe what's the through line from Robert Jung and his thinking to some of the folks here, because I'm sure that the intentionality, that last word that Dave heard Ed Schein say last Wednesday, that is clearly present in Mr. Jung's work and some other people that come to mind for me from the more German school of thinking around this.
Yeah,
but thank you so much for sharing that, Stefan. That is powerful.
It was beautiful.
Sorry, Dave, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm just jumping in because I look at there's a lot in this paragraph, but this idea of bringing social innovators together in a announced public place happened at my institution in the 50s in a room we used to call Founders Hall, and it was a group of people, including the founder of OD, and I'm blanking on his name. I shouldn't. It's the most very famous name with us, but freezing and unfreezing. Does that ring a bell?
Lewin.
Yeah, Kurt Lewin.
Another German.
Yeah, and not a coincidence, I don't think. His life experience brought him to a point of view that these problems that he lived through and escaped are so serious that no one particular perspective is going to do anything about it. So he famously brought together a group of people at the behest of the state education commissioner in Founders Hall for, I think it turned out to be almost a tea group for 2 days. And they talked and talked and listened, and he scribed. And at the end, they came out with some new social policy, including the people who could implement it in the group. So this is very nice coincidence that my life intersected with that particular school. I was not there in the 50s. I was only in 10 or 12 years old. But again, we have someone who did a lot of adventures and brave things early in his life, comparatively, Kurt Lewin. And then eventually it became a lot of our way of seeing the world. So that was very important.
Yes, thank you so much that you appreciate these words. And well, Christian Theodor, it's a wonderful idea to translate the book. Yeah, it's not done now. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff to translate, but perhaps we can begin with the online session and discuss some parts of that.
And let's start with with an overview, with like here is the really important stuff, and if you want to dive deeper, you're going to have to learn some German or use Google Translate for the time being. But yeah, that would be a lovely project. I'd love to collaborate with you and Petra on to at least get people to dip their toe into.
How did you find Robert Jung, Stefan? Did you meet him in person, and was he one of your thought leaders?
Yes, I met him in person several times. And when I have been a young student in 1976 in Berlin, I met a companion of Robert Jung. His name was Norbert Müllert, and he was a teacher, educator in the same institute. Yeah. And he brought me together with not only with Robert Jung, but also with Joe Weizenbaum, which was very important for my life. Have you heard of Joseph Weizenbaum? He was a critical computer science man who coming from the United States, and he well, today we would say he invented artificial intelligence. He wrote a program.
My goodness.
Yeah, he wrote a program which advises you in social difficult situation. And he would like to find out if the people on the other side of the line would notice, is this a machine or is it
Wow.
man? Yeah.
And now we're having the same experience with the chat. That is extraordinary. And you were young when you were meeting these people. And as I was when I met Peter Vale, and as Lisa now is listening, she's eager to meet people who can influence her heart and soul as well as her mind.
Not just people in their early 20s, you're saying?
Well, even you, Deo, can be inspired. But it's really great to hear these stories, because when you go back to the people whose work you're now presenting to us, Stefan, and say, I knew him, I met him. I have one more question. What was your experience? What was he like? Going back to polarity, was he gruff? Was he smooth?
no, he was very open-minded, and in the origin, he was by profession he was a journalist for technology. Yeah. And he was traveling around all the time. It was very hard to arrange a meeting. So the first time I met Robert Jung was in a train, because he said, I have to speak to people in this town and then going to that town. And then we jumped on the train in Bielefeld and drove all the way to Cologne, back to Cologne, just to have 1 hour of conversation with Robert.
Wow. Wow.
And,
Wow.
He always read newspapers and books like that. He took the book and began in the end, and then found out what is the best conclusion, and then rausreißen.
Ripped out.
Yeah, scrapped out the pages which were important and put it in his pockets. Yeah, sometimes he had really pockets full of destroyed books and newspapers. And when he spoke to the people, he just grabbed out and read it and said, I was just reading. I would spread this knowledge. Yeah, this was his style. It's wonderful.
Oh,
in the
goodness.
times where we did not have a smartphone. Yeah,
Oh,
the kind of smartphone was less in the early incarnation
right
of
there.
the smartphone.
He was
everything near to his body. Yeah,
he was his very own curation app of highlights and insights. I want to share just briefly. So this to me draws such a wonderful line between Stefan and Petra's work and back to Jung and Mr. Müller. So this I'll translate for the non-Germans. It's the two gentlemen that Stefan told us about, and then Zukunftswerkstätten are future workshops, right? But the key is on the workshop. It's a workshop in which and the German word for workshop here is the actual grimy, it's like being in your garage. It's like you have the saw out and you have the grease pot over here and the bucket of odd screws. It's that kind of workshop setting, right? It's not some boardroom where we go and we learn something new in a workshop. This is this is your garage.
The place of
and
work.
You're doing in this place of work, you're doing things around the future. And the little text below says, this handbook describes the method and impact of future workshops in which the participants can learn how their own wishes to shape their lives can be developed. The goal is a broad revitalization of democracy.
Good Lord.
In what year?
This is published in,
I think 75 or 76. I'm not.
Wow.
81, but this might be another, the edition that I'm seeing.
The first edition was in the middle of the 70s.
Yeah.
Carol, that was the vision of Seoul. And other place, the workplace is a learning place. The
learning organization.
The learning organization. And this was in his book in the 70s. I suspect it was read by folks who came up with some of that. Maybe Senge read it.
Unbelievable.
And Ed Schein. He probably could read the German. He was from Switzerland, but I'm sure he could read the German. And we're finding an awful lot of very cross currents here.
Traveled a lot, and for several years he lived in the United States after World War II, because he was persecuted.
Persecuted is the right word.
By the Nazis, because of his Jewish family. And he emigrated first in Switzerland and still fought against the regime in Germany. And then he went to America, and he was, he made reports on the nuclear bomb testing, and spoke with scientists who were involved in this. So,
good Lord, what an interesting human being.
And then he turned to Austria, and for several years to Berlin, Germany too, and then going back to Austria, he founded a library of future concerns, international library for books dealing with the future. And the people who worked there were very unhappy because all the books he brought into the
were torn.
Yeah, all the important pages were lost.
Because they were in his pocket, right?
They're all in his pocket.
But everything worked out in the end. This library is still existing in Salzburg. Salzburg is in the very west of Austria, near the border to Germany. And it's a place to be, Come to Austria, come to Salzburg, International Library of Change.
We'll connect my library with that library, and then we'll have a interlibrary exchange. But I love the idea of library of the future.
There's the rest of my life's work right there.
There you go. Yeah, work has begun.
Was he ever in an academic environment? Or
was he ever? What
was he ever in an academic environment? Was he ever a professor?
Yeah, he had been a professor, but we called him he was the first professor called, although he did not have a scientific career. He was made to a professor without scientific career.
Wow.
And there was the first professor like this in the end of the 1970s, Just
where did he teach?
Beyond subject,
Yeah. Where did he teach?
Where
did he teach? Was he affiliated with the university?
In the Technical University in Berlin,
Yeah,
Wow.
he was an honorary professor, is how you might translate it to English. But in German, especially in the 1970s, if you didn't have a clearly defined research-based doctorate, it was very uncommon for you to be in any sort of teaching capacity. So in some way, it's not unlike a teaching professorship might be now in that I'm applying for at VGSU, for example. But I would argue that people understood that he had done his research just in a different way from, getting a traditional published PhD dissertation process to his name. And I think Jung had multiple, honorary doctorate degrees, but he taught at TU in Berlin.
My hunch is he was by nature peripatetic. You mentioned, Stefan, that he loved to travel and give. And I don't think he could. Can you imagine him sitting for hours and hours in a faculty meeting, fighting over who gets the best chair? I don't mean the department chair. I mean the one you sit on. So, wow, what a nice concurrence that we have these stories that Theo has got us started on of people who have profoundly shaped us directly or indirectly through their writing. Wow.
I have a very picky question. Dave, go back to the slide where you showed the 5 people. Billy Albin, I don't know. and she's holding something that
She's
I
holding a
can't
rock.
see.
She's holding a rock that says friendship on it. It's the picture was taken from her obituary, as was Roland's.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay. I thought
Billy's
maybe it
Billy's
was a heart.
Billy's favorite quote for me that my students are so tired of hearing me say is, "The best plans are those that can be deviated from."
Yes.
And she said deviated. She didn't say changed or adapted. She said deviated. And I bet if I had seen her say it, she would have said it with a smirk.
Yep.
Who is Roland Sullivan? I haven't.
He is the he was one of the students of, oh, Carol, help me out. Carol Dannemiller, and sort of championed whole system transformation, wrote a chapter in the Collaborative Change Library. Kathy Dannemiller, not Carol Dannemiller. I'm saying Carol.
Dannemiller, yeah.
Yeah. Dear friends, I have students waiting for me. It is past the hour. I am so grateful for this
It went so
conversation.
quickly.
I know we should have, yeah, I could continue it for quite some time. We'll follow up with you and the rest of our friends and colleagues that were not here today, but hopefully we'll meet again next month. Lisa, thank you for holding down the fort as always, and Carol, Dave, and Stefan, thank you for showing up to this really wonderful conversation. I'm going to throw your quote by Mr. Jung in front of my students here in a second and see what their thoughts and reactions are, because I think it's so smack dab in the center of, the name of the class is Facilitating Organizational Collaboration. What better way to think of that than through working together to prosper the unheard and undreamt ideas in repetitive but non-instructed atmospheres of solidarity.
It's beautiful. If you would be so kind, if you get any nugget responses from them, would you share them with us?
No.
They'll be recorded. So yeah, I should be able to.
Thanks,
That
Theo.
would be wonderful.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.
I'll see you on Sunday.
Yeah.
Yes, you're
Bye
welcome.
bye. Thank you so much.
Greetings to
Bye.
Petra.
Bye.